Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and there is no doubting that the world is changing, which means business is changing, technology is changing, so much of society is changing, and that's why I'm really excited that we are joined by someone who is ushering in that era of change, and actually, I would say embracing that era of change to help businesses and people and teams navigate through that change in ways that helps us all come out the other side even better. Let me introduce you to today's guest and fellow entrepreneur. Her name is Joyce Shin. Joyce is a strategist, operator, and founder who blends neuroscience, business, and systems thinking to build the future of work. With a background in neuroscience from Emory and an MBA from Duke, she went on to lead strategy and operations at Dropbox and CNN, scaling organizations, driving multi-million-dollar growth initiatives, and navigating high-stakes transformations. Today, Joyce is the founder of Stochastic Potential, which is a company reimagining how businesses operate in the age of AI. Her work centers on building organizational systems that combine intelligence, adaptability, and ethics, all important considerations, helping businesses and institutions redesign roles, workflows, and teams so that machines do what they do best and humans are freed to do what we do best, which is, in Joyce's words, connect, innovate, and create value. Joyce's vision is to help organizations unlock resilience, creativity, and collective human potential in an AI-powered world, ensuring that as technology advances, the systems around it stay deeply human. If you're thinking to yourself, gosh, this is the intersection of so many things we're thinking about, that's why we're going to learn a lot. We're all in for a treat today, so I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Joyce Shin. All right, Joyce, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. I'm super excited to be here, and thank you for having me on the show.
Heck yes, I'm going to call out for listeners. You are tuning in or you're joining us all the way from Seoul, South Korea as you're traveling. So super grateful that you are here with us today. And I'm going to kick things off with you taking us beyond the bio. Who's Joyce? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Yeah. I can share a little bit more about myself, and my story really centers around people, and I think it always has. I've always been curious about what makes us human, how we think, make decisions, and behave that way that we do. And when I was younger, I explored a lot of topics around, philosophy, ethics, read a lot of books. I was always interested in the sciences and really honed in on neuroscience, which is the study of the brain and the mind. And when I was in college, I actually had a personal encounter where I sustained a pretty serious brain injury and was in a coma for about a week and a half. And thankfully, I survived and recovered from that. But when you go through something like that at 18 years old, it really makes you think about the type of life you want to live. And for me, one of the main learnings was to truly live a life of meaning, purpose, and impact. And that's really shaped a lot of the way that I make a lot of my major life decisions. And I think it led me to starting in my amazing career at Instacart, spent 4 amazing, wonderful years at Dropbox, most recently running the business operations for them, and then getting my MBA at Duke, and now really starting this entrepreneurial journey that, I never thought that I would be doing. And so my company is called Stochastic Potential. We are a young company, about 3 months old, and we're trying to build the science of creativity, really with a purpose to redesign some of the systems that we live and work in to focus on the human side of business, life, and society.
Yes, I'm so appreciative of that overview, Joyce, especially because I feel like it gives us such a glimpse into the fact that you've operated at really high levels in your professional career. And I want to pick on that for a second to talk about that entrepreneurial leap that you took, because I find for so many people that we use the term in entrepreneurial circles of golden handcuffs is that, Joyce, you had such an amazing career leading up to the launch of your business. What was that moment where you sat at work and you said, you know what, I want to start my own company. I want to be part of who ushers and innovates us into that next era of work and business. What did that entrepreneurial spark moment look like?
I think it was just seeing the gap in the market of AI was moving so quickly that there was a huge gap where we weren't focusing on the human side of the business. So, and that's really where I wanted to see some guardrails in terms of how we were building, leveraging, and focusing on how this is going to impact humans. And that's really what sparked starting the company.
Yeah, and it's really fun for me to talk to you today because I feel like in today's world, especially, I'll call out mainstream media for a second, Joyce. I know that you've seen all sides of the media machine and all the ways that it works, but I feel like there's so much fear involved in so much of society today, especially surrounding AI. And it's most often we hear the messaging of AI, machine versus human, not together. And it seems to me like you have a really optimistic, which I'm super grateful for. I share that view as you do. You have a really optimistic view of how we can set both sides of that equation up for success in tandem. Talk to us about that important approach, because I feel like, and I hope the narrative is shifting. And Joyce, I hope entrepreneurs and innovators like you and I, we help to shape that narrative. But talk to us about that view you have of what that future looks like between AI and humans.
Yeah, I'm definitely an optimist. I think that there's so much value that AI can bring, not just in terms of productivity, efficiency, but for its communities and for society as a whole. And so I think that once we, figure out how to leverage AI to drive a lot of those productivity, efficiency, and automation gains, then that enables us to recreate net new capacity and net new value that focuses specifically on the unique human elements, right? Things like creativity, adaptability, resilience, and trust. And so I think there's definitely ways that we could integrate with AI in a way that's thoughtful and in a way that allows for harmony.
Let's go deeper into creativity, because it's a word that pops up so much in your work with stochastic potential. And Joyce, I'll use myself an example here that I never really felt like a creative. I definitely didn't apply that label to myself because I've always loved business. And so loving business, I've always loved numbers. I've always loved strategy. I've always loved tactics. I never really, and I guess part of me associated creativity with visual, with arts, with all of those things. And I often remove myself from the equation. What I think is really powerful in the world of AI is that, Joyce, for the first time ever, I do feel somewhat creative. If I can think it now, I can create it thanks to AI. And where does that come from? A lot of people will point towards AI saying, well, that is, vibe coding. People use that term so much as if AI is creating the thing. Whereas myself as a business owner and creator, now I'm thinking, well, I'm an important part of that creative puzzle now. Is that the direction that we're talking about when we go with creativity? Or is there a more human foundational level that you hope to see people unleash when it comes to creativity?
I think it's both, but I think we're focusing on the more foundational human level of creativity where, there's a lot of unknowns still in the creative process, right? And so, for example, we don't actually know what a thought is. We don't actually know what a new idea, or if there is a quote unquote new idea. And so understanding creativity at both individual, team, and organizational levels, I think that's some of the focus on the type of work that we're going to be doing, is actually building the science of creativity. How do we actually understand it? With the ultimate goal to redesign some of the systems that we live and work in to focus on the human side of business, life, and society.
Yeah, I love that. Let's talk about those systems, Joyce, because you bring such a unique vantage point and, of course, skill set and expertise to the table. We're talking about the intersection of neuroscience, business, and systems thinking. And I feel like we throw that term around so frequently in business circles of systems. And we talk about it on a societal level. We talk about it on a business level. We talk about it in a work level. We all, in one way or another, we all have work, whether we're self-employed or we're 9-to-5ers. What are those systems that you're really looking at that you're already seeing the tides changing and you're saying this is the future and things are changing and we need to address them now to set us up for success? What sort of systems do you have your eyes on?
I think one is the corporate system in terms of how roles are actually designed, right? And so once machines go from being able to do 25% of someone's job to 50% to 99% of someone's job, ultimately we're going to have to fundamentally rethink what roles are, the fundamentals of work, and how teams and organizations are built. So I think that's one system that we're operating in, and that is super exciting to think about the puzzle pieces there. I think the second system that's really integrated and involved is the educational system. So especially within the world of AI, making sure that we're actually teaching valuable critical thinking skills leveraging AI. So how do we leverage AI to make us smarter, not just more efficient, but actually make us create more, whether it's written pieces, whether it's new ideas at school. And so how do we use it to foster, facilitate learning and education? So I think that would be the second system that is top of mind.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought education into this, because Joyce, when we reached out to invite you to come onto the show with us, that's part of what's so exciting about your background is you do have that academic background, of course. I mean, you've spent time at some of the top universities in the world at Emory and Duke, but also the professional background that you have. You listed off just a few of the really exciting companies that you've worked from Dropbox to CNN to Instacart. And then also as a fellow founder, you are pushing the envelope not only for others, but in your own business, in your own thinking as well. I often think about we use the analogy in business of boat sizes, and a big cruise ship cannot turn as nimbly as a tiny little boat with just a hand-propelled engine. And so there are pros and cons to each of those. As entrepreneurs, we get to innovate with very little costs, whereas if you and I are working at a Dropbox, they have much more formal team structures, they have formal processes in place. It's just a different environment. From your vantage point, having been a key player in all three of those arenas, where do you see that innovation being driven from, knowing that, the way that CNN is adopting AI is different from the way that small business owners are adopting AI? So how do you see all of these stakeholders pushing society and business forward together in tandem or at different paces?
I think it boils down to culture. And so regardless of team size, I think just the culture of innovation, of ideas can come from anywhere, and ideas being heard that come from anywhere. I think that really stems down to the level of creativity in organizations, right? And so even when I was at Dropbox and I was a young, junior professional starting out, I think people could see that I had scrappy ideas, and they listened to it, and they helped me build out some of those ideas and put in the work to develop and actually be able to implement some of those ideas. I think that really helps with the creativity and the innovation spark in some of these larger organizations.
I really like the way you answer that, because culture is something we talk about so frequently, but culture only gets built in the right direction when it's strategic and when it's intentional. And I think about what you're doing with Stochastic Potential. It's probably very exciting, but I would imagine there are businesses, universities, there are institutions that are thinking, Joyce, when we talk about redesigning systems, we've been doing things the way we've been doing them for 100 years in some cases. How are you finding those companies? How are you finding those universities that have that culture of saying, hey, the world is changing and we want to be leading it instead of lagging in those changes? What are those ingredients that you look for in identifying that culture that's ready to be redesigned?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that nothing is going to happen overnight. And so none of this change is going to happen. And we're not going to go from 0 to 100, tomorrow or even next week or next month. And so it's actually starting with how do we start the conversations, and how do we have a dialogue? And so I think from a cultural perspective, it's really the leaders and institutions that are just willing to listen and engage in that dialogue and conversation that really helps spur some of these initiatives forward.
Let's dive into something that I know will perk a lot of listeners' ears up, which is hearing you say things like redesigning roles. Joyce, there's so much, again, coming back to kind of some of the fear in the marketplace about AI and just technology advancements is people think it's going to replace humans. That's why I love your language around redesigning those roles. What does that look like? What are some examples of how we can redesign roles inside of our organizations?
Yeah, so for example, once we figure out how to leverage and optimize different workflows so that we're leveraging the best of AI, so we're being more productive and more efficient. So for example, what used to take us 10 hours now can take us 1. With those additional 9 hours, that allows us to, for example, talk to more customers, to grab coffee with a coworker and build some of those relationships, to work on a side project at work, right? And so I think those are some of the ways that we could thoughtfully and intentionally redesign some of our roles that create net new value for the businesses and teams that we're a part of.
It's cool hearing you say that, and also just knowing how much of your work focuses on that ethical consideration part as well. Talk to us about that, because having any of these conversations, but also doing it in the right way, the sustainable way. We all want our businesses to be here, not just for today, not just for this year, but for a long time. What do those ethical considerations look like?
I think the biggest one for me is making sure that we aren't leaving people behind. And so that we're making sure that we're bringing everybody along, whether it's through upskilling, reskilling, training, and education. I think that's one of the main focuses, especially at work, is making sure that, there's so many AI tools that we could be using. It's sometimes a little overwhelming. And so making sure that all the team members or all the people in your organization know how to use it, when to use it, and how to actually leverage the different tools and platforms we have in an effective manner. So I think that's one of the biggest things around the responsibility piece, is just making sure that we're not leaving people or anybody behind.
And what does this look like behind the scenes? Is it trainings? Is it consistent workshops every week or month or quarter inside of our organizations? Does it look like guardrails and policies, which sound like scary words on the surface, but obviously they're there to set all of us up for success? What does it look like to actually set our teams up for success across the board?
I think it's a mixture of all of those that you mentioned, right? It's a mixture of training, it's a mixture of actual, workflow redesign, of changing the way that we actually work instead of just tacking on a new tool or a new platform. And then I think it's actually creating some of those guardrails that aren't restrictive, but actually allow breathing room so that we're leveraging, these new tools effectively in a way that protects both the customers, employees, as well as the business. And so just simple guardrails in place that allow us to figure out how to use best case practices, or and what data we're going to be using, or what products we're going to be using. I think those allow us to be more responsible in the way that we integrate and adopt AI.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important mindset, Joyce, and I'm really grateful for you sharing that with us, because I think that when most of us hear guardrails, when we hear policies and regulations around that, we feel like it dampens our ability to use certain tools, whereas the way that you're talking about is actually enhancing our capabilities with these in ways, and you called it out, and I really want to go deeper here with you. You called it out that it's not just to protect us as the businesses, it's not just to protect our teams, it's also to protect our customers. It's to protect everything that is involved behind the scenes in our businesses. So talk to us about some examples of those guardrails, especially just knowing how many of our listeners and how much of our audience are fast moving. And as entrepreneurs, we tend to break things and we tend to figure things out as we go. What are some examples of considerations or guardrails that we can put in place that actually help us rather than dampen our usage of these tools?
I think the first one is just identifying best practices. So from the people that are on your team that are leveraging AI, how are they actually using it? And what's the value that it provides the business and the individual? And just scaling some of those best practices across the team. I think that's low-hanging fruit. I think the second guardrail is just making sure about what data is being exposed. So making sure that, for example, customer data isn't being used or used for any of these pilots or experiments, I think is a second guardrail that is critical for protecting both the business as well as the customers.
Yeah, it's such an interesting time, Joyce, and obviously the world is moving very fast. So I want to ask you personally, as a fellow founder, what are some of the ways that you're spending your time, obviously working with clients, but I want to talk about you in your executive function. What are some of those ways that you're spending time to stay on top of these innovations, to play around with different ideas, to foster your own creativity in exploring, hey, this is the way that the technology is going, here's how AI is progressing. What are some different ways that you're viewing it along the way as well?
Yeah, so I'm subscribed to a couple of newsletters that are at the forefront of AI, and so I'm looking at the tools that are coming out, the tools that everyone is adopting and using, and I'm integrating them in the way that I work as well. So whether it's writing articles or helping to figure out, capture some of my ideas, whether it's helping to visualize, I use Canva a lot. I think it's amazing in how in shaping some of the designs around different visual assets that I'm creating. And so I'm tinkering with the different platforms and tools myself in my everyday workflows as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I've got to ask you this question while we've got you here on the air. As a former math tutor, I've been excited to hear the story behind your brand. Obviously, in choosing the company name of Stochastic Potential, that didn't happen by mistake. It clearly reveals so much about the way that you see the nature of the work that you do. So as that former math tutor, Joyce, take us there. What's the meaning behind Stochastic Potential?
Yeah, so Stochastic Potential, the name reflects our philosophy where I took organic chemistry when I was in undergrad, and the professor, she hammered in the principle of stochasticity, which is the principle of randomness, disorder, and entropy. And really underneath that lies hidden patterns, structure, and emergence. And so I think that philosophy really applies to business and life as well, where we're all governed by different rules and different norms. But, and there's always an element of ambiguity, and instead of being afraid of that, I think that we should embrace that and we should design for that. Because underneath that ambiguity, there lies hidden opportunity and hidden growth. And so that's really that's really the philosophy behind our name.
I love that. It's so cool hearing those founder insights, because obviously our name is something so intimate and so intentional when we start our businesses. And it's really cool to see how that manifests in the nature of the work that you do as well, which makes me want to ask you this question, Joyce, because there's never one clear answer in this question, but I always do love asking founders about it, is the time horizon that you look at. Because I remember back in business school how frequently we talked about having a 5 and a 10-year plan. And as someone who's been an entrepreneur for 17 years now, I think 2020 changed so much of my perception about how much we can and cannot plan for. And you talk about, you kind of label it that ambiguity. And to me, as someone who's always excited about a lot of things and potential, that ambiguity is that really exciting unknown where we get to paint that future. So when you take a step back in your executive time, what's the time horizon that you're looking at? What's your so-called business school, like 5 to 10 year plan? Or is it more on a quarterly basis? How are you looking at manipulating time along the way?
I think I'm taking a long-term view, because I think some of these changes, redesign systems, takes a lot of time to do. You have to bring people along the way. And so my time horizon, is longer. I'm looking at like 5 to 10 years for the ultimate goals and for ultimate purpose and the work we want to do.
Joyce, it's so exciting hearing the way you phrase these things, especially with that future-looking view, because it's something I've been sharing. I've even said it multiple times here on the air throughout, especially Q4 of 2025, about the fact that in a world where technology is advancing, and when I look forward in my own executive function, I think about all the ways that we're going to be able to grow our team in the future, which is exciting for me because the technology is enabling us to do more of those things. You've been a part of some really incredible teams, Joyce, and just calling out, it's somewhere that I saw you scaled a 160-person design organization at Dropbox. And in a world where everyone is thinking, what does this mean for teams? What does it mean for, obviously, remote work is a big shift. Where does your mind go when you think about team building? What are some of those successful ingredients of incorporating human capital, human talent into these nimble organizations that we're all building these days?
I think it boils down to connection. And so however you build connection and however you can build connection best, whether it's in person, whether you do regular check-ins, whether it's in a remote setting, I think that boils down to building teams, making sure that we're actually learning, developing, creating that like cohesive bond with everyone that we work with, and making sure that we're supporting each other in both our work, making sure that no one feels that they have too much or that they are getting left behind. I think that really enables collective growth as well as that a strong culture.
Yeah, Joyce, it brings us full circle right in your bio. It's one of the things I love the most about the way you articulate the work that you do, which is humans are freed to do what we do best. And you list 3 things: connect, innovate, and create value. And here you are obviously talking about connection. What does that look like? Because you've worked in such different roles that I would imagine you've connected with people remotely, you've connected with people in person. It's something that as entrepreneurs, I don't think we've ever been taught some of those connection tools as our teams grow. What do those conversations look like? You talk about check-ins. What do those check-ins look like? Because I feel like way too frequently in the 9 to 5 world, a check-in means a performance review, which comes with critiques, which comes with praise, which comes with some of those formalities. Obviously, you're not talking about it merely as a formality. What do some of those connection strategies look like, Joyce?
Yeah, I think one of the things that helps me be successful is actually just thinking through the other person's perspective. So I think during COVID, when everyone was locked down, I think that enabled me to figure out like how the other person might be feeling and what they might be going through. That enabled me to connect with them better. I think it's just leading with empathy, and I think that gets used around a lot, but I think that's truly the way to lead. Is making sure that we're treating people with the actual human at the center and making sure that we're preserving some of those things as well.
Yeah, which sometimes the simple things are easier said than done. I think that you're right. We throw those terms around, but that constant reminder, and that's why I don't know how many listeners have tuned into Ted Lasso, for example, as a show. I'm a big soccer fan, so naturally I tuned into Ted Lasso, but the head coach in Ted Lasso himself, puts up a big sign in the locker room that just says, believe, and it's a constant reminder. If we're striving for empathy in a world where we know that fosters real life connections, can't just be a word that we think about and say, yeah, Joyce, I heard you in this episode. I want to lead with empathy. It's something that we need to constantly remind ourselves of. So super grateful for the fact that you're really emphasizing and re-emphasizing these points for us. As simple as they may sound, this is the important stuff. So Joyce, it's always so much fun having guests on the air because I get to squeeze in a few personal questions at the end of these episodes. And one that I want to ask you is, what does your day-to-day management look like? As a newer entrepreneur, as a newer company, there's so many things that obviously you're executing on: marketing, sales, your offerings, the way that you interact with your clients, your onboarding. There's so many different facets to your business. So Joyce, when you're sitting down, what are those things that you're focusing on at this point in your business?
I think one of the biggest things is just getting the foundational building blocks in place so that, as things grow and change, I can be nimble and be able to adapt quickly if I have those building blocks in place. And so it's making sure that the core operating principles are strong and the operating practices are strong. So I think that's a big focus. I think the second focus for us is growth. And so how do we grow and scale the business in a way that's thoughtful, in a way that is intentional as well. And then the last thing is building out the core team. And so right now, I want to make sure that we're building out the team and prioritizing the right roles. And so I think those would be the three main focuses for us.
I love that. And also, it's always exciting for me to ask this last question because it's super broad, so you can take it in any direction you want. And that is, what's your best piece of advice for listeners? Knowing that we're being listened to by both wantrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys, and also knowing that you are one of us, you are a fellow entrepreneur. What's that one thing that you want to leave them with today?
I think the one thing is just to listen to your gut. I think sometimes taking a risk might be scary, but I think that if you really want to do it, and I think the worst that could happen is that you fail, but that you learn and you grow from that. And so I think that ultimately, the one thing I would say is just listen to your gut and stay true to yourself. And I think you can't go wrong with that.
Yes, so well said. Again, advice that is timeless, that we can keep on coming back to time and time again. But Joyce, only if we give ourselves permission to check in and remind ourselves of that power that we have inside of us. So super grateful for you sharing those words of advice with our listeners. I'm also really excited for listeners to check out your website. Joyce, I will say, as soon as I landed on your website, I love the headline right at the top, how clear it is. We are a creativity intelligence think tank. And then right beneath that, exploring the elements of human creativity and maximizing human potential. It's so clear to me how strong you are in your mission in such a time of change. So for listeners who want to find all the incredible work that you're doing, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
So you can check out the website, stochasticpotential.org. You can find me on LinkedIn or Instagram. My username is Joyce Shin with 3 N's. And I can always be reached via email as well. And so happy to share the links after as well.
Yes, and listeners, you already know the drill. We are dropping all of those links down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. So if you're on the go, don't worry about spelling, don't worry about memorizing any of this stuff. Don't worry about trying to find Joyce on LinkedIn. I'm sure she's not the only Joyce Shin out there. So we are linking straight to her personal LinkedIn. So don't be shy in checking out her website, her socials, her LinkedIn. Those are all linked down below. Otherwise, Joyce, on behalf of myself and all listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Brian. This has been so fun and it's been such a pleasure.